From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump is formally arraigned in a federal courthouse in Miami and enters a not guilty plea to charges that he endangered national security and obstructed investigators with his retention of classified documents. Meanwhile, his former vice president, Mike Pence, now a rival to Mr. Trump for the Republican presidential nomination, meets with us at the editorial board and gives his read on the Trump indictment. Welcome to Potomac Watch. I'm Kim Strassel, joined today by my two impressive colleagues, Bill McGurd and Monet Ukwe-Barua. We actually got news of this indictment from U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith, the first ever of a former president, last week. The public was actually able to read the indictment for itself on Friday. 37 counts, most of them linked to the retention of this or that document, but also charges related to conspiracy to obstruct justice, charges of concealing documents. But Tuesday was the dramatic day, the first time in U.S. history when a former president had to surrender to U.S. authorities, where he was booked and fingerprinted, and where he then went on to have his attorneys register a not guilty plea on his behalf. Afterward, Donald Trump had an event at his club in Bedminster, New Jersey, not backing down at all. He again cast this as a witch hunt, and he also went after the special counsel personally. Let's take a listen.
The prosecutor in the case, I will call it our case, is a thug. I've named him Deranged Jack Smith. I wonder what his name used to be, Jack Smith. It sounds so innocent, doesn't it? Jack Smith. What's his name? Jack Smith. He's a very nice man. He's a behind-the-scenes guy, but his record is absolutely atrocious. He does political hit jobs.
You know, Bill, Donald Trump not backing down at all. I don't know what you made of all this. I couldn't help but be a little depressed. I was actually thinking of our current president, namely his promise during his campaign that were he elected, he'd return the country to some sense of normalcy. And yet here we are. There just seems to be no escaping drama when it comes to Donald Trump. And, you know, there's no question that Trump's behavior invites some of this with what is sometimes brash and reckless moves. At the same time, I'm with our editorial position that this indictment by Biden's Department of Justice, kind of never seen before decision for the head of one political party to charge the former president and current political rival, is very misguided, a misguided use of prosecutorial power, which could hold some really destructive consequences for the country. But I wonder, what were your thoughts as you were looking at this moment in this not guilty plea?
Well, I was thinking back to the 80s and 90s when I was in Asia. Korea had just become a democracy after the Olympics. And it seems that every president that was elected after that spent a time in jail. He was prosecuted after being president. And it wasn't good for the country. So I think there's different ways to look at it, what Trump did, what Biden and the justice did. If you look at it, what's good for the country, I think, as the editorial said, I don't see how this serves the country to indict a former president and current political candidate, regardless of whether he wins. This is regardless of Trump's feelings, just the injustice to the country, I think, how cavalierly this has been done. There's no outcome whether Trump is found not guilty or it's dropped or he's found guilty and goes to jail. There's no outcome that's good here. And I think we're going to open a whole lot of debates on sub-issues, some very important constitutional issues, and it's going to leave us more messy and more divided than we were when it started.
Yeah, you know, that's definitely my feeling as well, too. To me, the measure of whether or not you should take a step like this, something as momentous as indicting a former president, is, do you have a charge that is so grave and so convincing that you can convince most of the country of your cause? And, you know, looking at the polls that have come out since the indictment dropped, that's clearly not the case. This is a very politically divisive issue. Monet, just to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of how this court situation is going to play out. Tuesday's hearing was overseen by a magistrate judge, Jonathan Goodman, and magistrate judges handle a lot of the routine procedural aspects of court cases. But the actual case has been assigned to Judge Eileen Cannon. This was a random assignment, but it took only a nanosecond for the left to melt down over that naming of her, given that Cannon is a Trump appointee, and also that she had earlier handled a lawsuit that he filed challenging the FBI's search of his club for these documents. Many on the left are now calling on her to recuse herself from the case or for it to be forcibly given to someone else. Monet, can you tell us all a little bit more about the drama surrounding this particular judge and her past rulings and whether any of that remotely gives any credence to the notion that she should step down?
Sure. So yes, we have seen in the past day since Donald Trump was arraigned in Miami, a lot of cable news pundits, a lot of legal scholars, law professors on the left have called for Aileen Cannon to recuse herself from the case, which she has been assigned to overhear the prosecution of Donald Trump by the Justice Department. And the case that they're trying to make for removing Judge Cannon from that position is twofold. There's a very broad skepticism of her merely because she happens to be a Trump appointee. She was one of the many federal judges who Donald Trump chose to be nominated to the federal bench. And the idea is that in some way she'll be loyal to him because she owes her career to his appointment. The other more specific critique that a lot of progressives are making of Judge Cannon is how she ruled in that lawsuit you mentioned when Donald Trump was trying to have a special master appointed who would be able to basically determine which documents the prosecution would have access to during the course of the investigation preceding the federal charges. And so Judge Cannon agreed to appoint a special master, and she also suggested that there would be certain documents which theoretically might be privileged as a consequence of Donald Trump having been president, certain documents that might be subject to executive privilege that during the course of the special master review, the prosecution would not have access to for their evidence. So she would put a temporary hold on which documents Jack Smith's investigation would be able to review and include in their potential charges that they would bring against Donald Trump during that period. The prosecution, after the appointment of that special master, sued and appealed the ruling to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which then sort of reined in Judge Cannon's ruling. They basically said that it makes sense to have a special master in this case, but we don't want there to be limits on which documents the prosecution is able to review. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to look at all of these documents during the course of the special master process. And so she was partly reversed by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And so because her logic was found to be flawed, a lot of progressives are saying, we've already seen that she's in the tank for Donald Trump. She went way too far to give his side every advantage that she possibly could have. But I think that listeners will agree that this was difference of judgment in a very complicated case. Obviously, there's never been an instance before where a president has been subjected to federal charges. Judge Cannon was partly reversed, but there was nothing in her ruling that sort of went out of her way to give an unfair advantage to the Trump campaign. And so it really doesn't make very much sense to suggest that she has shown her bias for President Trump and wouldn't be able to rule in a fair way. But progressives, of course, are looking for every excuse they possibly can to try to make sure that a judge who would be critical of President Trump would be in that position of being able to rule. And they just want to taint the results of this case and suggest that it was unfair in the event that Donald Trump ends up being exonerated.
That's cynical. Look, judges are overruled and reversed all the time. That's certainly not a reason to make them step down from a case. It also just strikes me that this demand that she have to recuse herself because she was appointed by Donald Trump is a standard with no limiting principle. Does everyone on either side of the political aisle get to demand that a judge step down because a president of the opposing party put the judge in office? That's not how we operate. One intriguing part of Trump's comments in Bedminster, he obviously went after Jack Smith, but He also offered a little bit of insight into how he's going to defend himself against these charges. Now, we already knew from comments from his attorneys in the media that he is going to rely to a certain degree on the Presidential Records Act, which officially governs the handling of documents of presidents. We actually have a fascinating piece on our pages today, which people should go read, by an attorney who actually tried to get a hold of records that belonged to Bill Clinton and ended up getting a ruling from a judge in which they said that presidents alone get to decide what documents they keep or don't give back to the National Archives. Kind of a fascinating situation there. But then Donald Trump expanded on this a little bit. Let's take a listen.
People have asked me why I had these boxes. Why did you want them? The answer, in addition to having every right under the Presidential Records Act, is that these boxes were containing all types of personal belongings, many, many things, shirts and shoes and everything. I hadn't had a chance to go through all the boxes. It's a long, tedious job. It takes a long time, which I was prepared to do, but I have a very busy life. I've had a very busy life. They make it more busy because you're always fighting.
Bill, Donald Trump has a busy life. He certainly does. But what's really interesting about this to me, because it's actually something I floated last week that could be a possible defense, is that the prosecutorial argument hinges a lot on the idea that Trump deliberately took and tried to conceal these records from the Department of Justice, to willfully keep them out of the hands of the government. And Trump here is suggesting, look, I had a lot of boxes. Everybody knows I'm a bit of a hoarder, and I wasn't deliberately keeping anything. I just, it had sort of the same situation, as it were, as Joe Biden, who he ended up finding some more documents next to the Corvette. Or Mike Pence, they found some records after the fact. It's an oversight. Now, Bill, I'm not sure how this goes over, given that some parts of the indictment suggest Trump knew he still had info that he maybe shouldn't have. We'll see what the defense has to say about that. But what do you make of this argument? I had a lot of boxes.
I think there are 3 points to make some distinctions. One is that on substance, one of the differences between Trump and Pence and Biden is that Trump had subpoenas, right? And he fought them or ignored them. And that was different. Second, on the legal argument, those who say that the Presidential Records Act, especially litigation with Bill Clinton, who had some documents in his sock drawer, they say there's a distinction between what Trump's talking about, personal documents, notes you took, and so forth, and an agency-generated document. Like, for example, if the Pentagon came up with a game plan in the event Iran attacks something, what would we do to respond? They say that wouldn't be considered a presidential record. But those are legal arguments and legal distinctions. I think in terms of the popular distinction, people see that all these guys had classified documents and only Trump got prosecuted. So it's kind of a clever popular defense. I don't know if it'll help him in court because he's accused of very specific things. And I think if you look at those things, it's going to be hard to argue that he didn't do them. I mean, as a popular matter, also, people see there is a double standard with how Hillary Clinton was treated and how the Bidens are treated and the Russian investigation. There's a glaring double standard. They're not even interested in the other stuff. So I think he's going to use that to boost his ratings, but I don't know whether it will help them when they go to trial.
Yeah, on the legal argument, it strikes me that one of the reasons so many theories are out there and nobody really knows, and there's such diverse views on this, is not only is this the first time that we've ever prosecuted a former president, but we've never, obviously, therefore, prosecuted a president on the issue of this question of document retention. So completely uncharted legal territory. It's going to be really interesting to watch.